Okay, welcome everyone. This is Bob Ginsberg. I'm co-founder of Forever Family Foundation, and welcome to today's webinar. We have a terrific guest, Dr. Bob Davis. Before I introduce Bob, just some housekeeping. First, if you're not a member of Forever Family Foundation, please go to our website. On the homepage, it says Become a Member. You click on it, enter a little bit of information, when you're done. It's free of charge. We're an all volunteer global not-for-profit organization. So once you become a member, you'll have access to all of our activities. As far as the way that the format will go, Bob has a great presentation that he will be showing us all. We will, in the last 30 minutes, after Bob's presentation is over, open it up to questions and answers. You can open up your Q&A box and type in a question. You could do that while the presentation is going on, if you think of a question, or wait to the end. Either way, we'll get to as many as possible. And let me put my glasses on and read Bob's bio, because I don't know it by heart. After receiving his doctorate in the sensory neurosciences from Ohio State University, Bob Davis served as a professor for the State University of New York for over 30 years. He conducted research in the behavioral and neurosensory sciences, taught, and held many high-level administrative roles. He published his research in over 60 articles in science and scholarly journals, and presented numerous lectures worldwide, which included invited lectures at Harvard, Cambridge, and Peking University. Bob was awarded numerous grants by the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health to conduct research in sensory neuroscience. Following retirement, he published several articles in the Journal of Scientific Exploration and Edge Science, and has given lectures at national and international conferences on consciousness, and spiritually transformative experiences. He's also published 4 popular books: The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe?, Life After Death, An Analysis of the Evidence, Unseen Forces, The Integration of Science, Reality, and You, and The Consciousness Connection, Extraordinary Human Experiences and the Nature of Reality. More recently, he's turned his recent book, The Consciousness Connection, into a documentary now streamed on Gaia.com, that's Gaia.com, and that film is entitled The Consciousness Connection Foundations. You can watch the documentary on Amazon Video. Bob's website we put up, but it's bobdavisspeaks.com. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Bob Davis.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Bob for the invitation to present this webinar on consciousness in the afterlife, and thank you all for attending. My talk will be about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending upon the rate of my speech, but and it will contain a little bit of science, only because you can't ignore it when we discuss concepts regarding the afterlife. But the objective of my talk concerns a concept as to whether or not the essence of our being or consciousness leaves this world after death of the physical body. And this has concerned humankind from the earliest times, ever since we stopped crawling out of the primordial soup and evolved into inquisitive, inventive, and somewhat intelligent bipedal primates. People have wondered if upon death we diminish into a void of non-existence, persist in a realm of alternate realities, or revive in a cycle of what we call reincarnation. But while on this topic, I have a very cheerful thought for you. You are going to die. One day your brain will indeed cease functioning and you will become a non-entity. Or will you? We all have wondered at least once in our life what happens when the hard drive crashes and the screen fades to black. Is death really the grand finale? While many consider death the definitive end, there exists anecdotal, experimental, and theoretical evidence to suggest otherwise. But despite such evidence, which I'll address in this talk, the concept of life after death is a dilemma that ultimately rests with you. Next. If consciousness persists after bodily death, consciousness would have to be independent of brain function. So the primary issue is whether or not consciousness is independent of the brain. If so, it may survive death, but science has yet to determine what consciousness is, whether consciousness acts independent of the brain, what it does, how it functions, where it originates, or even why it evolved. But they all acknowledge that consciousness does exist. But right now, something very strange is happening. You're listening to my voice, but there's also another voice, the one inside your head. That's consciousness. It's invisible, it's nowhere, and yet it's everything. The conscious mind is the me that feels sadness when music plays. It's it's the you, the essence of being that doesn't show up on an x-ray. It's the you that remembers your first kiss. Scientists call that consciousness, the experience of awareness, the feeling of being alive, knowing you're alive. But here's the thing, no one really knows where it comes from. Is it just neurons firing in the brain, or is it something deeper? If consciousness is more than just a byproduct of the brain, then we will have to look beyond. Next. Given this dilemma, I will focus on several of these issues which support the survival hypothesis or life after death. And I did so, especially for those who may not be familiar with some of these terms, and I'll be fairly quick because I know most of you are. In near-death experiences, individuals are presumed to be clinically dead for brief periods of time, but they report a continuation of conscious perception. A veridical out-of-body experience is one who reports being separated from their body and accurately perceives events beyond the reach of their senses. Reincarnation refers to the existence of a post-mortem, non-physical characteristic of one's identity renewed in another physical body. In an after-death communication, someone is contacted directly by a family member or friend who has died without the use of psychics, mediums, or therapists. And in mediumship, we're talking about the reporting of accurate and specific information of the deceased without prior knowledge, fraud, and in the absence of normal sensory input. I will also discuss cognitive and neurobiological evidence and theories on the nature of consciousness. I'll try to be as relatively mild as possible with that, and its relationship to the brain. Next, please. This slide presents the two possibilities of consciousness. Consciousness is the state or quality of being aware and able to think, feel, and experience. It encompasses everything from sensory perception to abstract thought and self-awareness. Despite centuries of inquiry, it remains one of the most complex and debated topics in science and philosophy. For example, one possibility is that consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity. That is, there are no connections between individual physical brains which allow for extrasensory perception or the afterlife. So after we die, our consciousness is eliminated along with the body. We are essentially gone forever. The second possibility is that consciousness is not dependent on the brain and can affect physical matter outside the body. Consciousness, in other words, extends beyond the brain and survives death. It suggests a mechanism, an explanation for near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, after-death communication, mediumship, and reincarnation, among others. The key question is whether consciousness can persist in the absence of brain activity, or does the brain construct reality? In other words, is consciousness our brain? To me, consciousness is what allows you to know yourself, which is what the universe is about. Next, please. This slide compares the main philosophical concepts of consciousness, that is, materialism versus idealism. Materialism, for instance, is the view that matter is a fundamental substance in nature, and all things, including consciousness, thoughts, and emotions, are results of material interactions. That is, consciousness is the brain, and thoughts are neural processes. In contrast, idealism, which is what I support, is the view that consciousness is the primary reality, and the material world depends on or is shaped by mental activity. That is, reality is fundamentally mental or spiritual, and the material world is a projection or manifestation of consciousness. So to me, consciousness involves more than creating the mere awareness of the reality one experiences. It involves a subjective richness that is deeply personal. It's the idea behind what it feels like to be me as a conscious entity. I believe consciousness is primary and that mass and energy emerge from consciousness. Next, please. In this slide, you can see that there's a clear relation between structure and function of the brain. But although we have mapped the brain and correlated structure and function, as you can obviously see, we have yet to find where consciousness exists in the brain. Neuroscience struggles with the challenge of how something as tangible as the brain gives rise to the intangible complexities of consciousness, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Next slide, please. One answer to the survival of consciousness after bodily death comes from the studies of near-death experiences. For my documentary called The Consciousness Connection on Amazon Video, for example, we interviewed oncologist Dr. Jeffrey Long, a near-death experiencer researcher and founder of the Near-Death Experiencer Research Foundation, who said, as you can see in the slide, that's a picture of me and Jeff at the International Association of Near-Death Studies, where we interviewed him for the documentary. He said that when people have an NDE, near-death experience, it's common for the initial thing that happens is called an OBE, out-of-body experience. Consciousness typically rises above the comatose or even clinically dead body. And from that vantage point, they can see and hear ongoing earthly events when they return to their body at the end of their life-threatening event and recover. If they check out the reality of what they saw and heard while they were in that initial part of the NDE, it's essentially always accurate down to the finest details. Next slide. The validity of the near-death experience is represented in this slide, which presents the reasons why this experience provides strong evidence for life after death. For example, people have NDEs while they are brain dead. Cardiologist, for instance, Michael Sabom, described a near-death experience that occurred while a woman, Pam Reynolds, was having a surgical procedure to repair a tumor on a basilar artery in the brain. For all intent and purposes, she was dead. In order to perform this procedure, they had to remove all the blood from her brain, lower her body temperature to 50 degrees, stop her breathing. She was basically on support, life support, while they worked on the tumor. Amazingly, however, during the time that she was clinically dead, she had an NDE and had a detailed veridical or verifiable out-of-body observation during her surgery which was later verified to be true. Her case is considered to be one of the most strongest cases of veridical evidence in NDE research because of her ability to describe in great detail the unique surgical instruments, the surgical procedures used on her, and the ability to describe all the events that occurred during the operation while she was clinically brain dead. Also, out of body perceptions during near death experiences have been verified. For example, Dr. Bruce Grayson, a psychiatrist and leading NDE researcher, documented perhaps one of the most compelling examples of a person who had an NDE who observed events while outside of his body, which were later verified by others. His patient, Al Sullivan, while undergoing cardiac bypass surgery, uh, talked about his doctor, Dr. Takata, flopping his arms like this with his hands in his armpits while he was doing the surgery. But Sullivan's cardiologist, Dr. Takata, was amazed that he could describe his arm flapping because it was his idiosyncratic method of doing that, keeping his hands sterile in his armpits while indicating what instruments and what personnel should be doing what with his elbows. So when he said you were flying like a bird throughout the procedure, Dr. Takata was amazed that he was able to actually describe his behavior despite the fact that he was completely unconscious. In addition, people born blind can see during a near-death experience. Dr. Kenneth Rain and Sharon Cooper completed a study into near-death experiences of the blind and documented clear evidence of 31 cases in which blind people report visually accurate information obtained during their near-death experience. In another study of the 11 blind individuals, all but one reported having normal vision during the NDE. 10 individuals of that population of 11, in other words, claimed to have seen their bodies after leaving them during their NDEs. And based on the results, the researchers concluded that the experiences of the blind are essentially the same as that of normal sighted individuals who have a near death experience. This includes feelings of separation from the physical body, journeys through the tunnel, seeing the bright light, the feelings of peace and well-being, and encounters with deceased relatives, and a life review. Moreover, out-of-body experiences have been validated in scientific studies. Dr. Charles Tart documented the out-of-body experience of a young woman who is one of his research subjects. And what makes her particular out-of-body experience remarkable is that she was able to leave her body, read a 5-digit number from a significant distance, and correctly recall the number to Dr. Tart upon return to her body. And the odds of guessing a 5-digit number correctly are 1 in 100,000. This out-of-body experience is a clear example, an outstanding example of a veridical out-of-body perception where verified events are observed while in an out-of-body state. And we'll talk more about veridical perception shortly. And finally, many people have experienced after-death communications. If I may suggest, and Bill and Judy Guggenheim wrote a book called Hello from Heaven, and they present cases of after-death communications of deceased loved ones. And during their 7 years of research, they collected over 3,300 reports from people who believe they have been contacted by a deceased loved one. I have their book on my bookcase over there. I was going to show it, but I'm too lazy to get up. Next slide, please. Next, yeah, thank you. There are many common characteristics of NDEs that increase the validity of life after death. For example, it is common for NDEs to report crystal clear consciousness. That is, the level of conscious alertness during NDEs is usually greater than that experienced in everyday life, even though NDEs generally occur when the person is unconscious or clinically dead. This high level of consciousness while unconscious is medically unexplainable. Also, the elements in NDEs generally follow the same consistent and logical order in all age groups and all those around the world, which refutes the possibility that NDEs have any relation to dreams or hallucinations. NDEs also include realistic out-of-body experiences. OBEs, for example, are one of the most common elements of the near-death experience. Events witnessed and heard by NDEs while in an out-of-body state are almost always realistic. When the NDE or others later seek to verify what was witnessed or heard during the NDE, their out-of-body experience observations are almost always confirmed as completely accurate. Again, this is called the veridical experience. And this fact alone rules out the possibility that NDEs are related to any known brain functioning or sensory awareness. Also, not only are heightened senses reported by most who have NDEs, normal or supernormal vision has also occurred in those with significantly impaired vision and even those with legal blindness, as mentioned prior, which is medically unexplainable. Moreover, many NDEs occur while the person is under general anesthesia at a time when any conscious experience should be impossible. This is strong evidence that NDEs occur independent from the functioning of the material brain, and this is essential if there is life after death. During an NDE, the experiencer may encounter people who are virtually always deceased and are usually relatives of the experiencer. Sometimes they include relatives who died before the NDE was even born, and the NDE, the near-death experiencer, may not have even known the person. But surprisingly, you never hear of a person having a near-death experience seeing the living. And the question is, why? The NDEs of also very young children who are too young to have developed concepts of death, religion, or NDEs are essentially identical to those of older children and adults. And for those who want to know more about childhood NDEs, PMH Atwater is an expert in that area and has some very interesting books on that topic. But the NDEs in children refutes the possibility that the content of the experience is produced by pre-existing beliefs or cultural conditioning. And moreover, these common elements are remarkably consistent worldwide, across many different religions and cultures. Finally, a major attribute of an NDE is that it is common for people to experience major life changes. These are called after effects, and they are powerful, lasting, life-changing, and the changes generally follow a consistent pattern. A common belief, for instance, is that their experience of the afterlife was real. But the vast majority of people who have a near-death experience become more sympathetic and empathetic, uh, more spiritual in nature, less interested in materialism, less interested in organized religion, uh, more humane in general relative to the way they were prior to their NDE. Uh, the experience of love that they have is also remarkable, which is ineffable in nature. I once asked a woman who had a near-death experience, and she was telling me about the love she felt. And she said, the magnitude of the love I felt was like looking in the eyes of your first newborn child, magnified 10 million times. Maybe that gets at explaining the magnitude of that sensation of love that people do experience during an NDE. So, although there are no two NDEs that are alike, there are incredible common elements to the NDE described by young and old across cultures and in different languages, which support the concept of life after death. Next slide, please. The most significant NDE evidence in support of an afterlife comes from vertical perception cases, as we have been addressing prior. A near-death experience vertical perception refers to a perception or observation reported by a person during their NDE that is later verified as accurate and corresponds to real events or facts in the external world, despite the person being clinically unconscious at the time. Examples include a person in cardiac arrest accurately describing conversations, or people, or events occurring in another room or during resuscitation, and observations made from an out-of-body perspective that are confirmed by witnesses or objective data to be accurate. When I interviewed Dr. Bruce Grayson at the International Association of Near-Death Studies, I asked him about vertical perceptions, which led him to tell me a story which goes something like this. When he was an intern, he had a patient who was admitted because of severe respiratory problems. And his primary nurse, Anita, told him that she's going to take the weekend off and she'll be back Monday. In the meantime, this nurse over here is going to take care of you. He wished her well. She left. But while she was gone, he had a respiratory event and another near-death experience. And during that near-death experience, in a beautiful plush landscape, he suddenly turns around and sees who? Anita, his nurse. And Anita says to him, Jack, which is what his name is, Jack, I want you to go and tell my parents that I love them very much and that I am sorry that I wrecked their red MGB. Now, a red MG, this is back in the early 70s in South Africa where there aren't many red MGBs. So once he comes out of his near-death experience, he tells the first nurse he sees that about his NDE, and that nurse got teary-eyed and ran out of the room. Well, he soon found out that Anita took that weekend off to celebrate her 21st birthday, and her parents gave her a birthday present, which was a red MGB car. She was thrilled, of course. She took it out for a spin, crashed it into a tree, and died immediately at the time that he had his NDE. Now, there's no way Jack could have known at the time that she had died, or certainly how she had died, and yet he did. And we now have many cases like this that we're able to corroborate. That this is a clear vertical perception. Next slide, please. Another incredible vertical perception occurred to Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon. Many of you, I'm sure, know the name. He gained international attention from his near-death experience. And during my interview with Eben at his home in Charlottesville, Virginia, for my documentary, I asked him about his vertical perception, which led him to share one particular event that was convincing enough to prove that the experience was indeed real to him. According to Eben, the best thing about my NDE was I was with this beautiful young woman who I'd learned her identity 4 months after my coma. She gave me a beautiful message that I was to bring back to this world for each and every one of us. I knew her deeply from the experience she telepathically delivered to me with this pure emotional oneness that we shared. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. Next slide. What makes his story even more remarkable is that 4 months after his NDE, he received a photograph of his deceased birth sister, Betsy, whom he had never known in life due to his being adopted. So, to his astonishment, he recognized that the woman in the photograph was the same individual who had been with him during the NDE, where he and her were riding on a butterfly wing in a beautiful garden. And the recognition to him was unmistakable, with a loving smile, a confident and comforting gaze, and sparkling blue eyes. So for Eben, it was a profound confirmation of an existence of a realm beyond the physical world, a veridical perception of a proof of heaven. Next slide, please. In addition, psychiatrist, NDE researcher, and my friend Raymond Moody told me that several doctors have told him, that they are utterly baffled about how patients with no medical knowledge could describe in such detail and so correctly the procedure used in resuscitation attempts, even though these events took place while the doctors knew the patients involved to be dead. Similarly, according to NDE researcher and cardiologist Pim van Lommel, some patients remembered details of their conditions and events during their heart attack, despite being clinically dead, with a flat-lined brain activity. Next slide, please. Study results on veridical perceptions are compelling. For example, in a study of near-death experience cases with objective perceptions, 69% of the subjects reported an out-of-body experience, and 48% of the out-of-body experience cases reported precise perceptions corresponding to verified details in the environment and or to scenes which took place just as described, thus giving a precise idea of when the actual experience occurred. Also, Professor Jan Holden documented that 90% of near-death experience reports a perceptual experience during cardiac arrest, prolonged respiratory arrest, or sensory isolation contained no errors. Next slide. Regarding extraordinary NDEs, during our interview with Dr. Jeff Long, I asked him what his most significant NDE was, and he replied, if I had to pick an NDE that was especially memorable, that would have to be Vicky. Vicky was born totally blind. You cannot explain vision to somebody born totally blind. Vicky, in her early 20s, was involved in a very bad car wreck. And for the first time in her life, she saw herself. She was having an out-of-body experience during her NDE. Her consciousness was above her, and her initial emotion was fright. It would be, of course, since vision was so unknown and unfamiliar to her. She didn't know what she was seeing down below. So she went on to have a very detailed NDE. And the interesting part of Vicky's NDE was that she claimed to see up, down, left, right, front, and back, which led Jeff Long to explain to her that we have our orbital sockets in the front of our heads, which allows us only to see forward, left, right, and up, which she has started to laugh uncontrollably, because to her, vision was 360 degrees. In fact, all people who have an NDE have a 360-degree visual field. Next slide, please. Statistically speaking, belief in the afterlife is common among NDEers. For instance, an overwhelming majority of those who've had an NDE become convinced of the existence of an afterlife, regardless of their previous skepticism. Before their NDE, for instance, the percentage of people who believed in life after death ranged from 22 to 38%, depending on the study. But after their NDE, you can obviously see that 76 to 100% of these same people believe in life after death. Obviously, that experience thoroughly convinced them that there really is an afterlife. Now, if large numbers of people, just as rational, knowledgeable, and skeptical as ourselves, have been convinced by firsthand experience that an afterlife exists, and most people who have had a profound NDE have been left unconvinced, isn't it irrational for us to ignore their testimony? Next slide, please. Interestingly, and not surprisingly, nearly all people who have had an NDE lose their fear of death due to the realization that there is a continuation of consciousness after death. Decreases in death anxiety, for instance, following an NDE have been reported in several studies, as you can see, from 63% to 0% and from 45% to 0. One near-death experiencer stated, "It is outside my domain to discuss something that can only be proven by death. For me, however, the experience was decisive in convincing me that consciousness lives on beyond the grave. Death was not death, but another form of life." Next slide, please. Sorry for the small print, but we'll go over this quickly. Anecdotal evidence for an NDE was depicted by several individuals, which I listed here in quotes, that I thought are most representative as examples of an NDE. For instance, one person said, "In this place, wherever it is, I did not have the limited consciousness I have on earth. It felt like I have 125 senses to our normal 5. You could do, think, comprehend, and so on, you name it, with no effort at all. It's as if the facts are right before you in plain sight with no risk of misinterpretation because the truth just is." Another said, "I look at it as a psychological healing process. I feel that my NDE was the best thing that ever happened to me. Without my NDE, I would not be happy today." A third person said, "After the NDE, value changes came. I felt that the materialism and external stuff that was a big focus before just didn't matter anymore. My priorities in life took a complete turnaround. I felt there was a purpose for my life." And finally, another person said, "I'm trying very hard here on earth, but I know where my true home is and how it feels. I remember it like it was today. I went directly to the most beautiful golden light, real true love, so much peace, protection, calmness." Next slide, please. Like near-death experiences, after-death communication also provides evidence of an afterlife. After-death communications, or ADCs, are spiritual experiences occurring when someone is contacted directly by a family member or friend who has died. Persons approaching death often experience a visit from one or more deceased loved ones or other spiritual entities, having apparently come to accompany the dying in their transition from this life to the next. One after-death communication, an elderly woman, for example, reported that she was having spiritual visitors. She said, "I know they're spiritual because they aren't coming in through the door." She said, "It's my deceased mother and deceased sister. I think they've come for me." She died 2 days later, peacefully and appearing to be filled with a happy expectation. And this is a common occurrence. William Peters, in fact, a leading psychotherapist and the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, recognized by many as the world's leading authority on after-death communication, suggests that a significant portion of the global population may have experienced this remarkable phenomenon. According to Peters, end-of-life death visions are a common experience during the dying process, characterized by a consistent sense of realism and marked emotional significance. Next slide. Some of the main findings and interpretation from Peters' studies include the frequent occurrence of visions, connection, and communication with the dying person, appearance of a transcendent light, and alterations of time and space. More specifically, he found that half of the ADC cases involve individuals reporting a vision of the dying person, suggesting a deep and intimate connection to the transition of the individual's soul or spirit. The depiction of the departing soul or spirit with imagery such as steam, smoke, or mist rising from the body adds a suggestive layer to the understanding of the transition from physical existence. This experience goes beyond mere observation and involves a deep personal connection with the transitioning individual, suggesting a form of communication beyond the physical. Peters also noted the presence of a transcendent light, often described as much brighter than any earthly light, in 1/4 of after death communications, which aligns with the recurrent theme of the radiant light in spiritual and near death experiences. And this light is considered symbolic, representing a connection to the divine or the afterlife. Next slide. Additional research in ADC was conducted by Erlander Haraldsson, who provided insights into the prevalence of encounters with the deceased. In surveys conducted in Iceland in 74 and 07, involving a total of 902 participants, close to 1/3 reported having seen an apparition or encountering a dead person. In another qualitative ADC study, researchers documented the properties of ADC with 17 informants to identify the sources of meaning of these experiences. All heard voices of the deceased, saw their images, felt their touch, and sometimes felt their presence, leading to the conclusion that ADCs are not signs of pathology, since they often have healing consequences. Next slide. A 2023 Pew Research Center survey found that 1 in 2 U.S. adults experience some form of after-death communication. Also, in one after-death communication study, 34% experienced the presence of a lost one. 28% revealed details about their life to a relative who has passed away, and 15% received direct communication from someone they've lost. Moreover, a 2021 study found that in addition to being a fairly common experience, after-death communication is an overwhelmingly positive experience that can reduce grief and fear of death. Next slide. Medical science acknowledges that ADC and deathbed visions, or DBVs, occur with great frequency worldwide. In a survey of medical professionals in the United States and India, for instance, a random sample of over 1,700 physicians and nurses reported that about 80% of 714 DBV experiences, deathbed vision experiences, were by those with a terminal illness that occurred not only to individuals who are aware they were dying, but also to individuals who were not aware or who had not been told that they were going to die. Next slide. Regarding deathbed visions, the main component is communication with the deceased, as we've discussed. When dying people begin to have these visions, they appear preoccupied, distracted, and may ask questions or focus on something beyond and attempt to share information by using symbolic language to indicate preparation for a journey. They often describe people or beings such as angels and deceased individuals and hold up their arms with jubilation at the moment of death. In these curious moments, they engage in conversation with someone only evident to themselves and report receiving information related to their needs in order to die peacefully or when to let go only after a certain event or condition takes place. One woman, for instance, insisted that she wear her best clothes because her deceased husband was coming to take her dancing. Another individual claimed to need a map to navigate his trip. And people very often say that someone they loved but who has died is coming for them or is in the room. Next slide. In more research, the high incidence of deathbed visions was revealed in a 2016 nationwide questionnaire survey in Japan, whereby 21% of almost 4,000 family members reported that their loved ones experienced deathbed visions before death. Quite startling, in fact, that a study results from over 1,000 doctors and nurses on the deaths of more than 100,000 people. About 10%, which is a lot, were conscious just prior to death. And of this group, 50 to 65% reported apparitional visits of loved ones and or awareness of another realm of existence. Next slide. Additionally, a survey study revealed that about 90% of 500 patients reported seeing angels of different colors with feathered wings, and that up to 40 angels could be seen in the room as death approached. The average interval between the first apparition and death was about 4 weeks, and in such cases, 83% saw deceased relatives, of whom 90% were from the immediate family. So it's also not unusual to hear the dying state, yes, dear, I'm coming, or I'm coming, just give me a few seconds, and die immediately afterwards. Intriguingly, many hospice workers contend that they have never sat with a dying patient who is not in the presence of an apparition. I've spoken to hospice workers and they say it's most unusual for the dying not to experience an apparition. Next slide, please. Another line of evidence to support the existence of an afterlife comes from the extensive research represented in the work of psychiatrist Ian Stevenson, who described in great detail over 2,500 cases of alleged reincarnation involving small children who claim to have had a previous life. Next slide. What makes these cases especially intriguing is that researchers rigorously investigated the information provided by the child to determine its accuracy. And astonishingly, approximately 1,700 of these cases have been considered solved. And in this context, solved means that the details shared by the child were matched with a real individual who lived in the past. Next slide. A typical example suggestive of how a reincarnation case develops may begin when shortly after birth, the parents notice a major birthmark. And between the age of 2 and 4, the child speaks about a previous life until about age 5 to 8, when they stop having these past life recalls. Most discuss the previous life with strong emotion, and the statements almost always include information of their death and the family of of that person in the previous life. This is especially true if the death was violent. Some children even identify strongly with their past life. They often express sadness for their loved ones and lifestyle loss from previous lives. and they insist on being called by their previous name and prefer to spend more time with their prior family. Parents have also reportedly heard statements from the young children, such as, "when I died," or "when I was big," as evidence suggestive of a previous life. Above all, however, Stevenson believed that the child's manner of behavior strongly resembled a person claimed to be recalled from a past life as representing the most compelling evidence to suggest, but not prove, reincarnation. The validity of this evidence is enhanced not only by the sheer quantity and consistency of the detail the children provided, but especially by Stevenson's contention that in a significant percentage of cases, the child's recollections about a past life were remarkably accurate. They were able to provide details about the deceased person and other specific information with a high level of accuracy. Next slide. The cases of young children recalling past lives become even more exceptional due to several factors that reveals a mix of specific patterns, adding to their intrigue. For instance, many children express past life memories with a strong emotional attachment. They reject their given names, preferring to be called by the names of their past lives, and show preferences and behaviors that align with their previous identities. This suggests not only a connection between physical characteristics, but also between psychological and emotional aspects of the previous personality and the current child. Violent death is another common feature. In the most significant cases studied by Stevenson, death was usually premature and violent in nature. Interestingly, about half of the subjects remembered lives that ended violently, and in about a third of his cases, the subject showed a fear associated with the manner of death, like developing a fear of water if they were drowned, or fear of guns if they were shot, or certain foods if poisoned, etc. In some instances, medical records confirmed that birthmarks on these children corresponded to wounds or injuries sustained by the previous person before their death. Stevenson, for example, documented 225 case reports of children who remembered previous lives having physical anomalies that matched their previous lives. Details that were confirmed by the dead person's autopsy record and photo. Remarkably, in 88% of these cases, the birthmarks were located within 4 inches of the fatal wound suffered by the previous person. And this close proximity between the birthmark and the wound strengthens the argument for a link between the two lives. When I was interviewing for my documentary, The Consciousness Connection, I attended the University of Virginia to interview some professors there. And there they had the Ian Stevenson Memorial Library. And in one of the artifacts that was encased in glass was the actual dagger, which you could see in the picture on the right, that a child claimed was used to kill him in a previous life. And that dagger that did penetrate the child corresponded with the birthmark, which is a common occurrence where these violent deaths, especially when sustained by knives or gunshot wounds, etc., birthmarks usually appear, as I mentioned, very close in position to where the wound appeared. Next slide, please. While the near-death experience, after-death communication, and reincarnation evidence are suggestive of an afterlife, mediumship, believe it or not, is probably the most important and compelling area of evidence to support the survival hypothesis or life after death. The primary goal of this research is to investigate information conveyed by mediums from reportedly deceased individuals to the living, known as sitters. This involves exploring anomalous information reception, which is the ability to report accurate and specific information without prior knowledge, fraud, or relying on normal sensory input. And that's referred to as non-locality, a concept we will briefly address shortly. Next slide, please. Mediumship research conducted by Julie Bichel, for example, has demonstrated under well-controlled conditions that certain mediums are capable of providing consistent readings significantly above what would be expected by chance. In a study involving 86 readings by 20 certified research mediums, for example, the mediums provided accurate and specific information of about 85% without potential sources of bias or fraud. And based on her research in mediums, combined with evidence from near-death and out-of-body experience, Bichel concluded that the survival of consciousness after physical death is the theory that best explains all of that data. Next slide, please. Since the 19th century, many high-level mediums have been repeatedly tested by scientists for decades without evidence of fraud. Leonora Piper is one example who stands out as a medium capable of providing compelling evidence for extrasensory perception. Despite skepticism in the field of mediumship, influential figures like psychologist William James, known as the father of psychology, he recognized the significance of Piper's abilities, acknowledging that it takes only one white crow to prove that all crows aren't black. And James considered Piper to be his white crow. James was so intrigued by her abilities that he conducted experiments by sending 25 of his colleagues to be read by Leonora Piper. And each one of his colleagues were amazed at the accuracy in her reports regarding the deceased and their lives. So even skeptics initially aiming to expose her as a fraud became convinced after observing hundreds of her mediumship readings. Next slide, please. Another line of evidence to support life after death are apparitions. An apparitional figure is generally considered to be a form of energy referred to as a ghost, spirit, soul, or consciousness of someone who either does not realize one's death or is strongly emotionally connected to their prior earthly existence. And research has shown that the apparition appears real, solid, may cast a shadow, occlude objects, and be perceived in a mirror. It is also unusual for an apparition to communicate with the observer, and any communication usually contains just a few words. The vast majority of about 80% of experiences are visual, less frequently other sensations and or a felt presence are reported. Next, please. Other attributes of apparitions include the findings that the apparitional experience is of very short duration, lasting less than a few minutes. An apparitional experience is relatively common. The incidence of an observation of an apparition ranges from about 10 to 30%, and about 25% of apparitional experiences are witnessed by more than one person at the same time. And in group experiences, all members may not perceive the apparition. About 60% of cases are not collectively experienced. Next slide. The apparition, which may represent the existence of the deceased beyond our conception of space and time, should be regarded as a real, mystifying perceptual experience. Nevertheless, the question As to whether the apparitional experience provides conclusive support for life after death must be regarded as tenuous, since an apparition has never been captured and analyzed. Next slide, please. This prior evidence suggests but does not prove life after death, since the uh, evidence is anecdotal and unlikely to persuade materialists of the existence of an afterlife. I mean, the primary question, therefore, is whether consciousness, of course, is independent of the brain. If that can be proven, then the afterlife becomes a likely possibility. So we need to look at the brain for any clues to consciousness. And one line of research that is turning heads is physiological evidence of severely damaged brains and its impact on people. Neuroscientists in general tend to believe that mental functions are created by the brain, but there exist several cases involving severe brain damage, which indicate that large amounts of brain mass, even entire hemispheres, can be drastically altered, damaged, or even absent without causing a substantial impairment of the mental capacities of those involved. And for example, in this slide, you can see an abnormal MRI of two people, one with only one hemisphere on the right, and the picture on the left shows a normal brain, but the one on the right, we're looking at the one on the left, but the one on the right shows about 1/3 of the brain that remains. Each grew up, however, a normal person with free will, and it lends credibility that consciousness is independent of the brain. That is, if consciousness is from the brain, you would expect it to be affected, especially under these severe organic issues, but it is not. Next slide, please. And to emphasize this point, in this slide, this person only had 10% of his brain. You can see a little piece of it on the left. While he only had 10% of the brain, he had a normal life and free will. He had an IQ of 85, which is below the average. He had handicapping conditions, but he was a normal human being. And again, demonstrated free will, suggesting again that the brain doesn't produce consciousness. In fact, William Penfield, a noted neurosurgeon who did surgery on open brains to map it for seizures, mapped the brain but couldn't find any areas that related to intellect, reasoning, or abstract thought, implying that consciousness is not part of the brain and provides evidence of consciousness being independent of brain function and thus may persist after bodily death. Next slide. Not to confuse you with high-level science, but it is still important to be familiar with certain principles in quantum mechanics in order for there to be life after death. Quantum mechanics is the science of our subatomic world and may hold the answer to life after death. Although our current medical and scientific concepts are inadequate to explain all aspects of the NDE, however, certain features of these experiences appear to correspond with some of the basic principles from quantum theory, like non-locality and entanglement or interconnectedness. After all, the brain is a quantum-based system. The brain is quantum-based, and it manifests as quantum mechanic principles of non-locality and entanglement. These are essential components of brain function, and this may allow for life after death, since many physicists also consider the universe as a quantum-based system which allows for a mechanism for the persistence of consciousness after death. A non-local quantum consciousness refers to the idea that consciousness is not confined to the brain or body and may exist beyond the usual boundaries of space and time. An entanglement is a fundamental concept in quantum mechanics, where two or more particles that are linked, such that the state of one particle instantaneously influences the other, no matter how far apart they are. In other words, if I took a subatomic particle, an electron, and I divided it in half, and I separated them by billions of light years, despite the vast distance between them, the manipulation of one results in an immediate and corresponding alteration of the other that was initially connected. So these complex principles of non-locality and entanglement provide the needed foundation for consciousness to persist after bodily death, especially since consciousness is likely a quantum-based energy. Next slide. More evidence of brain physiology is important for our understanding of the possibility of life after death. For instance, physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hamerhoff's orchestrated objective reduction, also referred to as the OR theory, states that microtubules, which form the cytoskeleton in brain neurons, it's like the frame of your house, the cytoskeleton of neurons. I'll show you a slide shortly illustrating this. They may be sites of quantum effects enabling non-locality and entanglement, decision making, and the source of information computation. This allows neurons to communicate with each other instantaneously and at a distance within the brain. These authors believe that the OR theory serves as the foundation for the human soul and may even account for one's perception of reality after physical death. Next slide. Here's a schematic of what you can see is a cell body on the left where it says nucleus, and the microtubules are filament-like structures in the cytoskeleton that gives support to the essence of the cell. And this is the site where quantum mechanics is believed to occur, where it enables consciousness and decision-making processes to initiate. You could put the next slide. We've got another 5 minutes. In support of life after death, non-local consciousness is the idea that consciousness is not confined to the brain or body and may exist or operate beyond the usual boundaries of space and time. This concept contrasts with the traditional neuroscientific view that consciousness arises solely from the physical processes in the brain. In other words, upon death, we may no longer exist in this space-time, but instead behave outside the constraints of our 3D space-time. Despite the many unresolved questions, many physicists, such as Nobel Prize recipient Eugene Wigner, are realizing the implications of quantum mechanics for possibly explaining the nature of life after death and anomalous events. This idea suggests that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality, potentially existing beyond the physical body. Next. In another theory to support life after death, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that every quantum measurement causes the universe to split into multiple universes, each representing a different outcome. You're only aware of one, but the others still exist with versions of you in them. Some have extrapolated this is to suggest that in one of these universes, a person's consciousness might continue after their physical death. Next. The great challenge for science um, in for life after death, combined with unexplained anecdotal evidence from studies in near-death out-of-body and after-death communication, reincarnation, mediumship, apparitions, theories in quantum mechanics, lend indirect evidence to support the concept that our consciousness is independent of the brain and may persist after bodily death. Next. The great challenge for science is to determine whether or not consciousness is distinct from the brain and can perceive a form of reality beyond the limited space-time continuum of our physical world when the body ceases to function. However, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to develop this concept into testable hypotheses since current scientific principles and associated methodology don't apply. The answer, therefore, may have to be based more on one's personal viewpoints developed from teachings, experiences, and possibly a touch of gut feeling. Thus, there exists a need to dramatically alter the way, if at all possible, to evaluate life after death. After all, there is no conclusive scientific proof of life after death, but anecdotal and experimental evidence continues to fuel belief in its possibility. The question, therefore, remains open, straddling the line between science, philosophy, and personal belief. Next slide. In closing, much of the information presented is in my new film, which I co-produced with Dave Beatty and Wilson Hawthorne, called The Consciousness Connection. That's sponsored by Gaia, and which is now being streamed on Amazon Video. Now you can, if that address that you see, http consciousness.media/free-movie, if you write that down, sign up, because you can watch the 90-minute documentary for free. If you go on Amazon, it costs you $12.99 otherwise. So if you're interested, we have interviewed many leading researchers in the field, near-death experiences, extrasensory perception, out-of-body experiences, consciousness, etc. And the aim of the film is to advocate for a new paradigm shift based on the evidence presented in this webinar and more, that recognizes consciousness as an active participant in life and the extraordinary human experiences facilitated in millions worldwide. Now, do you actually believe you are just 100 billion neurons in your brain? Or do you believe you will persist after bodily death? Also, next slide, please, is my latest book called, as you see, The Conscious Connection, Extraordinary Human Experiences and the Nature of Reality. Jeff Mishlove wrote the foreword to the book. It's based on my documentary and much of the information that we shared today in this webinar. Much of the information that I used to share with you was extracted from my writings of this book. I'm done, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Bob. That was a very comprehensive and complete view of many of the things that we talk about on a regular basis. So let's go to some questions. We have a question. Can you induce an after-death communication on your own? Is it possible, in other words, is it possible to request a message, so to speak?
Uh, it's not easy. There's no one well-established method to use in order to initiate an after-death communication. Although about 10 to 20% of people claim to have after-death communication. We all of us, I think, at one time of our life, think hard about our deceased relatives, especially parents, children, etc., hoping to connect, looking for an answer, which may be very subtle in nature, hoping that we will receive some form of recognition of their existence. And for some reason, vast majority are unable to be successful at receiving after death communication. But sometimes it occurs out of the blue for no reason. But I think if you send intention out repeatedly, meditate deeply, uh, keep sending intention out to make contact. Um, I know people have told me that has resulted in some success with after death communication. You got to be careful, however, about what you might imagine as being after death communication. It could fool your imagination, can fool you, but there's also that philosophical question about imagination. Uh, what is imagination? Some scientists are now believing that imagination is reality. What you imagine is as real as anything else. It's inside you, and can have powerful impact on your behavior. So now I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't have a cookbook recipe of how to induce an ADC.
Oh, you don't? Oh, okay. Um, can
Go,
you
go
have,
to, I'd say go to a qualified medium.
right? You know,
But
this
finding
is,
the qualified ones is a difficult part.
yeah. Here's a question that we get asked a lot. You know, can you have an after-death communication with a loved one who has since reincarnated? I mean, the answer that I usually give when asked that, you know, because a lot of people who lost loved ones are fearful of their loved one in spirit being reincarnated because they think that that'll end the communications. But the evidence seems to show that it doesn't, because consciousness, as you pointed out in the webinar, um, is interconnected and persists, and can persist in many different forms and perhaps across many different dimensions. So, you know, if you think of it in terms of an oversoul, we're all
Mm.
fragments of that oversoul. And so I still think that the communication continues. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but
No, no,
okay.
but
We had Joanne said, I had the privilege of being with my dad as he was dying, and I witnessed him reaching out his arms to what I'm sure was all our family that has passed. That's what you described in your webinar with the deathbed visions. She says, it was beautiful. My question is, how can I better live in this knowing that our loved ones are right here with us? Um,
how could I what?
how can I how can I better live in this knowing that our
Oh,
loved ones are right here with us? She writes that their consciousness is as alive as ours, maybe even more alive without all our human stuff mucking up the waters. Maybe that's the answer.
yeah, I was going to say maybe that's the answer.
Yeah. Um, I mean, if you're lucky enough to have witnessed such a sacred type of experience or had a profound experience yourself, um, that might be enough for you to have reached that knowing stage and just, you know, continue to embrace it. Um,
She's fortunate.
yeah. Um, is there a statute of limitations, so to speak, on an after-death communication? Um,
Statute of
in other words, he
limitations.
said his mother transitioned 15 years ago. Is it too late to have
Not that I'm
babies?
aware of. I doubt there's any research on that area. I'm not familiar with anything on that.
Yeah, and I mean our experience in in the mediumship readings is that sometimes discarnates come through after 40, 50, 60 years have passed. So it certainly doesn't seem to correlate with our linear time, although um, it does seem apparent that communications start to wane as our physical time passes, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Um, uh, Another question, the majority of animals appear not to be self-aware or have a consciousness. Do they exist beyond death?
Oh, yes, indeed. People who have uh, near-death experiences will often say that they can't are in communication, not communication, but do contact deceased pets. They see them,
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Deceased animals, um,
and they
come up,
certainly are conscious.
yeah, come up very often in medium readings. Then, of course, it raises the question, does every do cockroaches have consciousness? So I mean, the animals that come through appear to be domestic animals, like
Well,
cats
yeah,
and yeah.
yeah. But
Um,
there are philosophers, not to muddy the discussion up too much, but there is philosophers who contend that everything is conscious. Panpsychism, let alone cockroaches, or this desk here, all physical matter has a form of consciousness.
right.
Debatable issue, of course.
Yeah. We have a question from William. How long do you think it will be before we have scientific proof?
We have to develop a way to determine what conscious energy is. We don't have the tools or understanding yet to actually measure the type of energy that we're talking about, consciousness. Uh, all we know is that it exists and it's not found in the brain. And that's as much as materialist scientists will say about consciousness. It exists, but we don't know what it is or where it is.
Yeah, we have to find the answer to that first.
And the answer would probably require a new paradigm shift, and paradigm shifts are slow in evolution. It takes about 100 years before a paradigm shift occurs.
Yeah. We had a question asking how you became focused on this topic. Was it an academic interest or a personal experience or both?
Um, I had a Kundalini awakening. Many in your audience probably never heard of Kundalini, and I would encourage you to read about it. Kundalini, Kundilini. I think I spelled that right. Kundalini.
Yeah.
Um, Look it up. It's real. Do not doubt the authenticity of a Kundalini awakening. That made me more spiritual. It did have a life changing impact on me. And I also had a shared death experience, which also contributed to my interest in these areas, both combined. I had a lucid dream one morning, and the dream was that I was dying. I was suffocating, and it was horrendous. I actually felt as if I was dying. Of course, it woke me up, and during the dream, I had the knowingness that a colleague of mine who I worked with in the lab had died. Uh, I went to work that morning, a little shaken up from that emotional dream, but I didn't give much thought to that knowingness that my colleague, dear friend of mine, Anne, had passed away. When I opened the door to the lab, the faces of my colleagues made it quite clear to me that Anne did indeed die. Anne died at the same time that I had my in that share it's a shared death experience or empathic death experience. She was communicating it to me, and we've always always talked about spirituality with each other. And if anybody could inform me that they're dying, it would be her. It would be her. So that was so uh, extraordinary to me that both events combined threw me down that so-called rabbit hole, and I've been writing books ever since. And now I started producing movies. I'm now starting a movie on near-death experiences that Gaia is going to sponsor.
Mm. You know, it brings back to the question that was asked before, is that, um, you know, you don't really, once you get to that, what I call the knowing stage, where it removes all doubt about death being final, um, and that may come from, you know, your readings or research or a profound personal experience, then you don't really have the need for the scientific proof, because it's just something
Mm.
that you inherently know. And that
That's
may
right.
be what it comes down to. The proof may come, but personal proof is probably more um, effective and profound than
You
scientific.
exact. Oh, you beautifully said.
Yeah,
Ultimately, this dilemma rests with you. It
right.
rests with you based on your experience, teachings, and the touch of gut feeling.
Yeah. I know we had a little bit of delay at the bottom. Would you mind going on for a few more minutes with the questions, or?
Oh no, not at all.
Okay. Um, this was a question of whether the evidence is starting to be more accepted by the within the medical and academic environments, or is there still a non-materialist bias that prevents this evidence from being accepted? Um,
Heads are turning, especially with the new scientists coming on board. They're somewhat more open-minded. Uh, Many are having experiences. We talk about out-of-body experiences. We're talking about 10% of the population. Translate that to numbers. We're talking about many millions. Near-death experiences. 4 to 5% of the population have an NDE. We're talking about millions of people here.
yeah.
With the internet is also a major source of uh, communication that is obviously reinforcing the notion of these issues that we're talking about. More courses are being taught on ESP uh, and the paranormal in university settings. There's even courses on UFOs at university settings, um, more so than ever before. There's also many papers that are now being published in refereed journals on NDEs in medical journals. There are articles on NDEs, which is acknowledged by the medical science as a real physical phenomenon. Disputes about what it represents, of course, but uh, I have no doubt that there is an increase of interest among materialists, uh, and more are becoming idealists.
Yeah. Um, I guess in response to one of the earlier questions about fostering our own after-death communications, Bev mentioned the work of Dr. Alan Botkin, who we well know, um, and uh, he developed a process called induced after-death communication. So people may want to look that up online, and it's a
Mm.
process where involving a method that was altered, an EMDR method that a high percentage of people report after death communications with discarnate entities. Philip wanted to know if you're aware of any other studies. You referenced Dr. Tart's study with OBEs and the vertical 5-digit number. You want to know if there were any more studies that you're familiar with of people identifying a code word or number.
Uh, uh, Michael Sabom in a resuscitation study 2% of his population of cardiac arrest patients, 2% of over 2,000 patients were able to accurately identify a number that was hidden out of view. In other words, you'd have to be at the top of this room, the ceiling level, in order to view the numbers that were presented. 2% were able to do that. So it's a small amount, but 2% of 2,000 something is a all you need is one. You know,
Right.
all you need is one white crow.
Yeah. Um, I did, there are more, questions we'll be able to get to. There was someone who asked, if someone who is brain dead or in a coma or intubated, or uh, are they conscious of what is happening? Um,
Brain dead or in a coma.
yeah, I mean, when they say are they conscious of what is happening, I mean, I guess that means,
Well,
do they know that they're, in a coma, right? Or that they're brain dead?
well, they're probably having an out of body experience and should be aware of and should be aware. Yes, indeed. I
Yeah.
would say that they are.
Yeah, that's why we always encourage people when they're sitting with loved ones that are not responsive or in a coma, to continue talking to them, because there's,
As if they're res-
yeah,
can hear you. Exactly right.
I have direct personal experience with that, where uh,
Mm.
after after my son came out of a coma, um, he heard what people were saying to him while he was in the coma. So
Ah,
it's actually something that we encourage people to do. Let's see. I guess we have time for one more. Well, let's see. I mean, uh, I know people were interested in your Kundalini experience. I mean, just want to know if you can elaborate a little bit more on that. I don't know how much more there is to tell, but uh,
well, there was a physician in Australia who met with me after I gave a talk, and she was known for healing people. And I was curious, so I said, I'll have a session with you. So she starts sitting right in front of me, and she starts talking about removing attachments, removing negative entities from my heart, my liver, my back. Uh, Improve for the greater good. She kept talking about removing bad stuff and adding good stuff. It's somewhat metaphysical in nature. While she was talking, it wasn't the words, but while she was talking, it caused tremendous involuntary movements on my part. And it made my head, I had no control, no conscious control, made my head turn all the way as far as it can go. My mouth also deviated as far to the side as possible. My breathing is irregular, yet I'm perceiving my body acting in such a bizarre manner, yet I felt nothing but bliss. I have a video of it, Bob. I'll show you. Okay? Uh, it looks like I'm crying. It looks like I'm dying to any observer, but uh, psychologically, I'm feeling nothing but bliss. And I kept on saying it. Come on, give me more, give me more. Despite the physiological effect it was having on me, the rushes of heat. I had to take my shirt off. I was so hot. And when we were over, we smelled sulfur in the room. Uh, I'm not sure what that meant, but I read it's a good sign when you remove negative entities. I don't know how you prove that, but it had a profound effect on me. It induced anxiety for a long time. I couldn't explain what it was, and I was afraid that it was a negative thing. But over time, I integrated it, and based on what I've read about Kundalini, it's very positive, but it can be life altering. And it was in my case. I started writing books. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if I didn't have a Kundalini or shared death experience. I
Yeah,
doubt I would be talking to you right now.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
I believe it. Um, And, I apologize if we can't get to, we were not going to be able to get to all the questions, but they're all good questions. And we can address them on our weekly radio show. So, I'll copy them and we'll talk. I just want to end on one question because I think it's important. And the question was, does the concept of life after death transcend religion? In other words, is a belief in God requisite to experience spirituality.
No,
I,
no,
yeah,
not at all.
right.
No, atheists have NDEs and meet deities, and even the worst of the worst in the world have NDEs, and it doesn't. Prior religious experience is not a factor.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. Well, with that, we'll have to end it here. We'll address some of the questions on our radio shows every Thursday night. I thank most of all, I thank Dr. Davis for being with us. It was a terrific presentation. You can learn more about all this stuff we're talking about on his website, bobdavisspeaks.com. I know we've been giving you the links to all these things, so hopefully you've clicked on some. And thanks everybody for joining us and continue searching and learning and experiencing. And we'll see you next time. So long, everybody. Thanks again,
Thank
Bob.
you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye.